On a gray, wet November morning in Calder County, West Virginia, a 47-year-old woman sat at her kitchen table and counted the last money she had left in the world. $164.30. She counted it twice, not because she was afraid of counting wrong, but because her hands needed something to do, while her mind refused to believe the number. Outside the window, the fog off the Laurel Fork came crawling up through the pines, so thick she could not see the mailbox at the road. The cabin smelled of cold coffee, of cotton thread, and of a man who had died 3 days before. Della Renner had lived 26 years beside that man, and in all those 26 years, she had misunderstood him from beginning to end. The man's name was Silas Renner. He was a ferryman. For most of their marriage, Della had treated her husband's trade like a chronic illness with no cure. Every morning he rose before the sun, walked the half-mile down to the landing, lowered the steel boat into the water, and carried people back and forth across the river until dark. There was a highway bridge 11 miles to the north, a 4-lane concrete bridge they built back in 1974, and by every reasonable measure Silas's ferry should have died the day that bridge opened. But it did not die. Because the poorest people in Calder County, the fishermen, the retired miners, the mothers with no car, the children who walked to school, they did not have 11 miles to spare. They had only the river and the man who took them across it. And Silas Renner had never once learned how to charge what a thing was worth. That was what Della resented. He took a quarter a crossing when he remembered to take anything. When the passenger was a child on the way to school, he took nothing. When it was a woman holding a feverish baby on her way to the clinic, he not only took nothing, he rode faster. When it was a drunk with no money in his pockets, he carried him anyway because, as he said, a drowned drunk drowns the same as a sober man. Della had stood at this kitchen window 1,000 afternoons, looking down at the landing, counting those free crossings, the way you count coins slipping through your fingers. She was a seamstress. She understood the worth of every stitch. She understood that a coat mended in the right place could survive 3 more winters. And her husband just rode and let the river carry off what should have been their future. 26 years. She had been angry with him for 26 years. They had married in the fall, the year Della turned 21, in the little white church on the hill, with 12 guests and a supper of cornbread and her mother's fried chicken. Silas was already the river's ferryman when she met him. Had been for the better part of 2 decades, his hands long since gone hard, his eyes carrying that look of a man used to watching moving water. Della loved his quietness before she learned to hate it. She thought a man of few words was a man who saved, who put away, who built a roof that held. She had been wrong about what he saved. He did not save money. He saved his words and spent them on the river instead. Della was a seamstress, and she was good at it, the way only the poor can be good at a thing. She could look at an old coat and know exactly how many more winters it had left, if it was mended in the right place. She made wedding dresses for other people's daughters, took in the whole town's clothes, sewed by lamplight until her eyes blurred. Every stitch she made was a calculation. A strong seam was $3 not spent on something new. A button set back on was a shirt not thrown away. She understood the world through thrift, through holding on, through never letting anything useful go to waste. It is the religion of people who have never had enough. And every evening, from the kitchen window, she watched her husband do the opposite of everything she believed. She watched him give it away. She remembered the winters they burned scavenged wood because they could not afford coal, while he ferried half the town for free. She remembered the year the roof leaked and they could not fix it, while he spent a whole day taking an old man to the hospital. She remembered standing in the kitchen, her hands shaking with anger, asking him why he did not take money from the people who could pay. He only looked at her with those river eyes and said, "The ones who can pay will pay on their own. The ones who can't, we don't ask." And she had hated that answer for 26 years, because to her it sounded like a man refusing to grow up. They had no children. That was a different grief, an old and quiet one. And perhaps it was that grief that sharpened her resentment. She had thought, on her darkest nights, that if they had had a child, he would have had to be serious about money. He would have had to choose his family over the whole town. She never said it out loud, but it sat there between them, all those decades, a question that was never asked. It was only much later, after she had read the ledgers, that she understood he had never once thought of himself as a man without children. He simply considered every child who fell into that water to be his own. There had been a time, early in the marriage, when she still believed she could change him. She would lay out the household accounts on the kitchen table. At the end of the month, the small, careful columns of a woman who knew how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. And she would show him where the shortfall was, where the heat money had gone, where the roof fund stood empty again. He would sit across from her and look at the columns with genuine attention, because he respected her, and he respected numbers. And then he would say something that undid all of it. He would say that the Hartley girl had been carried across 4 times that month on her way to the county nurse, and that her mother had no money, and what number should he have written down for that? And Della would have no answer, and the not having an answer made her angrier than any argument could have, because it meant she could not even win the fight cleanly. She could only lose it slowly, month after month, year after year, to a kindness she could not refute and could not afford. Over time, she stopped laying out the accounts. She decided it was easier to carry the resentment quietly than to keep losing the same argument. And so the silence between them, which had once been the thing she loved in him, became the place where she stored everything she could not say. She thought he did not notice. She was wrong about that too. In the back of the last ledger, in a margin, she would one day find a single line in his square hand that had nothing to do with the river. Della, tired tonight, took in the Combs' wedding dress on top of everything. I do not deserve her. He had seen her. He had simply never learned how to say so out loud, any more than he had learned how to charge a fair fare. They found Silas on a November morning, slumped against the side of the steel boat, one hand still closed around the pole, the water around him flat and still as a mirror. His heart had stopped. 68 years old. The doctor in Hollow Pine said he had gone fast, almost without pain, and Della had nodded her thanks for that information without understanding why it gave her no comfort at all. The funeral was small, the cold was sharp. A gray November morning, the wind coming up off the river through the cemetery on the hill, and the last oak leaves falling onto the cedar coffin like dry hands. Della stood at the front, in the black coat she had sewn herself years before. Her arms folded across her chest, and she was surprised when she turned to look behind her. There were more people than she had expected, far more than that poor little ferry landing had any right to summon. They stood in small groups at the back, silent, heads bowed, and not one of them came forward to speak to her directly. She thought they were shy. She thought they did not know what to say to a widow. A few of them left strange things on the grave. Not flowers, but quarters, one at a time, set in a row on the fresh earth. One man left a small oar carved by hand. A child left a smooth river stone. Della did not understand what those things meant. She picked up one of the quarters, turned it over in her hand, and set it back down. It would be weeks before she learned that each of those coins was a crossing, a thank you for a passage made long ago. Only later would she understand that they were not shy. They were grieving in a way she did not yet have the key to read. 3 days after the funeral, Della sat counting $164.30, and she opened the yellow envelope the county lawyer had handed her. Inside was the will. Silas Renner left his wife everything he had, the cabin, the riverside land, and the ferry and boathouse at Renner's Landing on the Laurel Fork. Della read those words and nearly laughed, a dry and aching laugh. He had left her the very thing that had eaten their lives. He had left her the river. But beneath the will, tucked into the same sheaf of papers, was another document, a notarized copy, and the heading at the top of it did not match anything she thought she knew about her husband. Deed of Community Covenant, Laurel Fork River Rescue Landing, recorded at the Calder County Courthouse, April 14, 2006. Della did not understand most of the legal language on that page, but there was one line she read over and over until it printed itself behind her eyes. A line that said Silas's ferry was not only a ferry. According to this document, it was a registered river rescue station. And Silas had done something with it 19 years before, something that had bound that worthless-looking place under state law in a way she could not begin to comprehend that night. She folded the paper. She looked out at the river. And for the first time in 26 years, she wondered whether she had ever truly known the man she had shared a bed with. She did not sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the free crossings, thousands of them. She had always thought of them as his weakness, a man who could not say no, a man who let the whole town use him. She had loved him the way you love a kind but foolish child, and she had resented him the way you resent yourself for loving such a person. But that notarized paper was not the work of a foolish man. It had been drafted carefully, It had dates. It had a seal. It was the work of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and who had hidden it from his wife for 19 years. She lay in the dark and let a new question take shape, a question that frightened her more than widowhood. If she had been wrong about this, what else had she been wrong about? For 26 years she had built an image of her husband in her mind, a kind but useless man, a man who had failed her, who had chosen the river over her. She had lived with that image. She had been angry at it, pitied it, and finally endured it. But what if the image was false? What if the man she thought she had buried was not the man who actually lay in that cedar coffin? She realized, lying there in the silent house, that grieving a man you understood was hard enough. Grieving a man you had never understood was something else entirely. It was like losing him twice. Toward morning she got up, went down to the kitchen, and sat looking out the window toward the river she could not see in the dark. She thought about the way he always came home late, and for the first time she wondered whether all those late returns each had a name, a date, a line in some ledger she had never seen. She did not yet know about the ledgers. But the instinct of a woman who has lived beside a secret for 26 years began to whisper to her that the notarized paper was only the first thread, and if she pulled it, a whole cloth would come unraveled. The next morning, Della Renner put on her coat, put on her boots, and for the first time in years, she walked down to the landing herself. The path down to Renner's Landing ran half a mile, gently sloping, paved with gravel and rotting pine needles. The gravel crunched under her boots in a rhythm that Silas's own feet had worn into the earth over the decades. The smell of the river reached her before she saw it. Cold mud, the smell of moss, of wet wood, and a faint metallic smell of water running over shale. The mist still hung on the surface. And when she stepped out of the tree line, she saw it for real. For the first time looking with the eyes of someone trying to appraise it rather than someone resenting it. It was worse than she had thought. The wooden dock leaned hard to one side, half its boards rotted, a few of them sunk through into black holes. The steel boat Silas had rowed lay overturned on the mudbank, paint flaking, one side dented. Behind the dock stood the boathouse, a cedar shed in silver. With the years, the tin roof rusted, the door hanging off its hinge. Beside it, nearly drowned in the reeds, was a smaller shed she had never noticed, low and square, with a door latched by an iron hook. The whole property, to the eye of anyone who knew how to reckon, was a pile of rotting timber, waiting for the day the river would carry it off. Floodplain. You could not build on it, you could not sell it to anyone. She stood in the middle of that ruin a long time, and a part of her, the part that had been angry for 26 years, wanted to laugh bitterly. Here it was. This was what Silas had traded their whole life to keep. A leaning dock, a dented boat, a silvered shed waiting for the river. The rain began to fall in a fine mist, the small cold drops clinging to her cheeks, and the smell of river mud rose thicker, the smell she would learn to love, but at that moment only knew as the smell of failure. She picked up a piece of rotted board, and it crumbled in her hand like a wet biscuit. She let it drop. This was all her husband had left. But even standing there, angry and wet and cold, she could not help noticing one thing. The steel boat, dented as it was, had been turned over neatly, the side wiped clean, the bottom without a single crack. The coils of rope in the boathouse were wound tight in a way only a riverman knows. The oil lamp on the post was still full of oil, the wick still fresh. This was not neglect. This was a place tended by a man to his very last breath. A careless man does not wipe down the bottom of his boat the day before he dies. Della did not yet understand what that meant. But she noted it, the way a seamstress notes a carefully sewn stitch on a torn garment. 3 days later, an appraiser from the county came down, walked around for about 10 minutes, made a few notes on a clipboard, and wrote her a number. Della held the paper up and looked at it for a long time. The appraised value of Renner's Landing, including the dock, the boathouse, the boat, and estuary structure on the land, $0. The appraiser added, almost kindly, that if she wanted, he could help her file the paperwork for the county to take the land back and clear the tax debt. Della thanked him. She folded the paper. She thought of the $164 in her account, and she thought of the small shed with the door latched by an iron hook. She decided to stay and clean it out. She told herself she was only staying to sell what could be sold, to clear away what Silas had left before she handed the land over to the county. That is what she told herself. But the truth was that the notarized paper had hooked into something inside her, and she could not leave without understanding it. There was something else, too, though she would not have admitted it that morning. The cabin had become unbearable. It was full of his absence in a way the landing was not. At the cabin, every chair was a chair he was not sitting in. Every silence a silence he was not keeping. But down at the river, among his ropes and his boat and the smell of the work he had done, his absence felt different. Not like a hole, but like a thing set down for a moment that might be picked back up. She did not believe in ghosts. She believed in needles and thread and the worth of an honest seam. But she found that her hands wanted to be where his hands had been, and she had learned long ago to trust her hands even when she did not trust her reasons. She started on the second morning with a bucket of water, a utility knife, and the hands of a seamstress long used to fine, patient work. She scraped moss off the side of the boat. She pried up the rotted boards. She sorted the piles of rope, the life rings, the bamboo poles, the coils of jute line gone hard as stone. The work surprised her. She had expected to hate it, and at first she did, her back aching, her hands raw from the cold water and the rough hemp. But there was a rhythm to it that her body understood without being asked. The same rhythm she knew from a lifetime of fine repair, the patient undoing damage, the slow restoration of a thing worth saving. She found, scraping the green slime from the hull, that she could read the boat the way she read a worn garment. Here was where it took the most wear, the bow that struck the dock 1,000 times a year. Here was a patch he had welded himself, crude but sound, holding 20 years on. Here, scratched into the steel near the stern, where no passenger would ever see it, were 4 small marks, and she stood a long time before she understood that they were tally marks, and then she stopped trying to count them, because she knew now that whatever they counted, it was. And every so often, as she worked, a memory would surface that she had filed away wrong. The winter the Pruitt family lost their heat, and Silas disappeared for 2 days. She had assumed he was off at the tavern, and they had argued about it bitterly, and he had never defended himself. Now, scraping the boat, she understood he had been ferrying firewood across the river to a freezing family, load after load, in weather that could have killed him, and he had let her believe the worst thing rather than make it a story. The memory rearranged itself in her chest like a bone being set, painful and then, strangely, more whole. She had spent 26 years remembering a marriage that had not quite happened. The real one, it was turning out, had been better than the one she grieved, and that was the cruelest mercy of all. And by noon on the second day, as she bent to pull a tarp aside in the boathouse, she heard gravel crunch behind her. She turned around. A young woman was standing at the edge of the tree line watching her. The girl was about 22, thin, brown hair tied low, wearing a work coat patched at the elbow, patched by a hand that Della immediately recognized as a clumsy one trying to imitate a skilled one. She stood still, not advancing, not retreating, her eyes both wary and strangely familiar, as if she were the one with the right to stand at this landing and Della were the stranger. Della called out a greeting. The girl did not answer. Della asked who she was. The girl was still silent, but she raised a hand, pointed to her own chest and made a gesture. The hand spread flat, undulating like the surface of the water, then closing and lifting. A motion it would take Della weeks to understand. The motion of someone pulled up out of the water. The girl could not speak. She could not hear, and she had been here in some fashion long before Della ever set foot on this landing. The people in town called her Wren. No one quite remembered her real name, because she had come to Calder County as a small child after a flood some years back, and Silas was the one who gave her the name. Wren, the smallest bird that sings the loudest. Della learned these things a piece at a time from an old woman at the grocery, from the man who fixed engines out on the main road, from the scattered fragments people let slip once they realized she was Silas Renner's wife, and that she truly knew nothing. Wren lived in a small room behind the laundromat, did odd jobs, and every night, no matter the weather, she walked down to the landing and lit an oil lamp that hung on the tall post at the head of the boathouse. Then she sat there a while, looking out at the river, and went home. Della asked why. They told her that was what Silas did every night for more than 40 years. And when he could no longer do it, Wren did it for him. The lamp. Della had seen it her whole life and never truly looked at it. An oil lamp on a post at the head of the landing, burning all night, casting a faint yellow glow out onto the water. She had always thought it a waste of oil, one more foolish habit of her husband's. Now she stood at the landing at dusk and watched Wren climb up to light it, and she began to understand that the lamp was not for the landing. It was for the river, so that anyone on any night who was down there in the water and did not know where the shore was would have a point of light to swim toward. Silas had a thing he used to say, they told her, a thing he muttered every time he lit it. Keep the lamp lit. No one crosses alone. Della Renner had lived 26 years with those words right beside her and had never once heard them. Wren began coming down to the landing each morning alongside her. No one had to tell her to. She knew where the rope went, knew which board was rotten, knew how to flip the steel boat in just the way that would not throw your back out. The two women worked side by side in silence, one who could not speak, one who no longer knew what to say. A kind of language formed between them in those days, a language that needed no words. When Della needed a tool, Wren had put it in her hand before she could turn. When Wren found a rat's nest in the coiled rope, she rapped 3 times on the hull, and Della understood at once that something was wrong. They ate lunch together on the mended dock, bread and cheese Della brought, and Wren showed her things on the river. She had never noticed, though she had lived beside it half her life. The place the blue heron stood hunting fish each morning. The place the water changed color when it rained upstream. The place the undertow pulled hardest, where Wren drew a hand across her own throat. Never swim there. Della realized that this silent girl read the river the way she herself read a piece of cloth, knew every thread, every place it pulled tight, every place it was about to tear. One afternoon, Della noticed the patch on the elbow of Wren's coat, that clumsy patch trying to imitate a skilled hand that she had seen on the first day. She asked by pointing at it. Wren looked down, then made the motion of sewing in the air, then pointed toward the town, then laid a hand on her own chest. It took Della a moment to understand. Someone had taught Wren to sew. Some woman in town who had perhaps taken pity on her had sat down and shown her how to hold the needle. And that night, at home, Della took out her sewing box, and the next morning she carried it down to the landing. She put it in Wren's hands, sat down beside her, and began to teach how to thread, how to hide the knot, how to sew a straight, even line. Wren learned fast, her hands deft, her eyes intent, and for the first time since the funeral, Della felt something warm in her chest. She was teaching someone to sew. She was passing something on. She did not yet know that this was exactly what Silas had done his whole life, only he had passed it on to the river. And it was Wren, on the 5th day, who led Della to the small shed with the door latched by an iron hook. She stood before the door, laid her hand on it, then turned and looked at Della with an expression both pleading and urgent. As if to say, "It is time you should see this." The iron hook had rusted. Della had to strike it 3 times with a hammer before it would give. The door opened into a darkness that smelled of cedar, of machine oil, and of old paper. Inside was a wooden table, a chair, a storm lantern hanging on a nail, and along the back wall a shelf that ran from floor to ceiling, packed with what at first glance Della took to be accounting books. Before I tell you what Della found in that shed, and believe me, it is the thing that changes everything, I want to stop for 1 second. If stories like this mean something to you, if you believe that quiet kindness deserves to be told, please take a second to hit subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. A single comment is enough to help this story find the person who needs to hear it. Now, let's go back to Della, standing in that dark shed, the hammer still in her hand. They were not accounting books. Della pulled the first one down and opened it in the light from the door. It was a hard-bound ledger, the spine wrapped in cloth, the pages yellowed and curling at the edges. On the first page, in Silas's careful square hand, the hand she had seen on 1,000 notes, the hand she thought she knew, was a heading. The laurel fork, those who crossed. And below it, ruled into columns with a straight edge, were names. Column after column of names. Each line a name, a date, and a short note. March 14, 1981. The Pruitt boy, 8 years old, fell into the eddy below the old bridge pier. Pulled out at the shallows. June 2, 1983. A man name unknown came down from upstream in the flood. Unconscious. Lived. November 9, 1984. A schoolteacher whose car had failed, carried across daily through the winter, could not pay. Did not ask. Della sank down into the chair. She turned the page. More names? She turned again. Names, a whole decade of names. Some lines were short enough to chill the blood. February 17, 1987. The man on the iron bridge. Sat with him until dawn. Lived. Some were longer, more detailed, as if Silas needed to set down enough never to forget. August 30, 1990. 2 boys capsized their canoe in the eddy. The older one caught the post. The younger one went under naps before I got him up. Had to press the water from his lungs. Their mother works nights, never knew, did not tell her. Some lines had a single word at the end. The word Silas used to mark the times he had come too late. Lost. Della counted that word 7 times across the decades. 7 people the river had taken before he could reach them. She realized that he had recorded even the ones he could not save, written down their names, written down the day they died, as if remembering them was the last thing he could still do for them. A heartless man does not count his own failures for more than 40 years. She reached for the second book, then the third. The shelf held more than 30 ledgers. 40-odd years. Della counted them roughly, her hands beginning to shake, and she understood that what she held was not a set of accounts. It was a list. A list of the people who had not drowned at this bend of the river because a man went down to the landing every morning and lit a lamp every night. She read for hours. The light moved across the floor of the shed and she did not notice it. She read entries from before she had even met him, a young man's hand, the letters rounder, the notes longer, as if in those early years he had still believed someone might one day read them. April 1979. A girl from the hollow walked out onto the ice. It did not hold. Got to her with the pole. She would not say her name. Lived. She read entries from the middle years, the hand grown spare and certain. She read the year of the great drought, when the river ran so low, there was almost nothing to rescue anyone from, and even then he had written down the names of the people he carried across on foot through the mud, because to Silas a crossing was a crossing whether the water was high or low. She read a single line that stopped her breath. October 1994. The boy who left the letter. He came back. He is all right now, and she understood that the child's letter she had not yet found, the one that said, "You are the only one who ever waited for me," belonged to a story that had ended well, and she did not know why that made her cry, but it did. She read the failures too, the 7 times the word lost appeared, and she made herself read each of them slowly, because it seemed to her that if Silas had carried those 7 names for 40 years, the least she could do was carry them for an afternoon. A man caught in the spring melt before the lamp could even be lit. A child no one knew was missing until morning, each one written down with the same square care as the ones who lived, because to leave them out would have been a second drowning. And Silas Renner did not let the river have anyone twice. This was the thing she had called his weakness. This was the thing she had counted like coins slipping through her fingers. She found letters, too, tucked between the books. Dozens of them, some scrawled by hand, some typed, some only a few lines on the back of a postcard. "Thank you, Mr. Renner. I will never forget. My daughter has children of her own now. She is alive because of you." There was a letter from a man who was now a doctor in Charleston, who wrote that as a boy of 17 he had been swept off the low crossing in a flash flood, certain he was going to die, and a ferryman had come out into the current and dragged him to shore, and never once asked him to be grateful for it. He wrote that Mr. Renner never told anyone the story. He wrote that it was the reason he became a doctor, so that he could pull people back the way he had been pulled back. There was another letter, only a single line, in a child's handwriting, kept flatter and smoother than all the rest. "Mr. Renner, you are the only one who ever waited for me. No name, no date." Della held it a long time, and she wondered what had become of that child, whether they had grown, whether they were still alive, whether they knew that the man who had waited for them had kept this letter all these years in a shed, latched with an iron hook that even his own wife did not know about. She would never know the answer, but she understood from the simple fact that he had kept it, that to Silas each of these lines mattered more than any dollar he had ever failed to earn. There were letters that thanked him for nothing at all, that only told a story. One woman had written to him every year at Christmas for 15 years, telling him about her life after the night he carried her across the river in a storm. She married, she moved away, she opened a bakery, she had grandchildren. Each letter was a slice of a life still being lived, a life that should have ended under the water if not for a lamp and a man willing to row out in the dark. Della arranged the letters by year, her seamstress's hands doing it without being told, and she realized she was mending something. Not cloth, but an understanding, a picture of the man she shared a bed with for 26 years and never truly met. Della set the letter down and she wept. She wept not from grief, or not only from grief, she wept from shame. Because for 26 years she had sat at that kitchen window and counted the free crossings as failures. When every one of those crossings was a line in these ledgers, a name, a person still breathing somewhere on this earth, because of the husband she had imagined she understood completely. But Wren, standing in the doorway, did not let her weep long. She came forward, leafed through a few of the books with a familiarity that showed she had been in this shed many times, and found a particular page. She laid her finger on a line. Della wiped her eyes and read, April 20, 2007, the big flood. A family from the camp upstream. The mother and father did not make it. A little girl about 4, found at the shallows below the boathouse. Cannot speak, cannot hear. No one came to claim her. Named her Wren. Della looked up. Wren was watching her, one hand still resting on the page that recorded the day she had been pulled from the water that killed her parents. And for the first time, the young woman smiled. A small, trembling, tearful smile. And then she made again the gesture she had made on that first day. The hand spread flat, undulating like the surface of the water, closing and lifting. "This is me," she was saying. "I am one of the names. I am living proof that he did not throw his life away. He gave it away, one crossing at a time." Then Wren turned a few more pages, into the later years, and showed Della something she had not yet noticed. Her name did not appear only once, on the day she was pulled out. It appeared again and again, year after year, not as someone rescued but as someone keeping the record. Because as Wren grew up, she had become Silas's second pair of eyes on the landing. She was the first to notice the night a figure stood too long on the iron bridge. She was the one who ran to fetch him when the water rose. In the later pages, Silas's square hand paused now and then to set down a different kind of line. Wren's saw it before I did. Wren held the rope. Wren stayed with them. Della understood that the man had not only pulled this silent girl from the water. He had given her a reason to keep living after she had lost everything. He had turned a mute, orphan child into the keeper of the lamp. He had given her the very thing that Della, for 26 years, had never realized she was being given to. A place to belong. Wren laid her hand on her own chest, then on the ledger, then pointed out the door, toward the lamp on the post. The gesture was so clear Della needed no translation. "The lamp is mine now," she was saying. "I keep it for him. And now that you are here, perhaps you will help me keep it." Della looked at the girl, at the silent and shining thing in her, and she felt 26 years of resentment begin to dissolve like mist off the river when the sun comes up. She said nothing. She only reached across the table and took Wren's hand, and the two women sat there in the shed that smelled of cedar and old paper, among 40 years of names, until the light outside turned the yellow of late afternoon, and it was time to go and light the lamp. The news that Della had opened the shed spread through Hollow Pine within a week, the way all news spreads in a small town. Through the grocery, the parts counter, the church where people pretended not to gossip until the service was over. And then they began to come. The first was a man named Dale Pruitt, past 50, his two hands big and hard as turtle shells. He came down one afternoon, stood at the edge of the landing, took off his hat, and told Della that he was the 8-year-old in the first line of the first book. The boy who fell into the eddy in 1981. He said he did not remember it himself. He was too young, but his mother told it to him every year on his birthday. How Mr. Renner had thrown himself into water, cold enough to cut skin that March, and pulled him out from a place no one thought a body could be pulled from. Dale Pruitt had 3 children now. The oldest was named Silas. He apologized for not standing closer at the funeral. He said he had not known what to say to a woman the whole town owed. Then came a woman named Carla, her hair gone gray, leading a tall, awkward young man. She was the mother in the storm, and the young man was the baby from that night. The northern bridge was flooded. The clinic was on the far side of the river, and Silas had rowed across rising water in the dark so she could deliver her child in safety. Carla said she had paid him a quarter, all she had in her wet coat pocket. She said he had taken it because he knew she needed to pay, needed to feel she was not a beggar. Then the next morning he had quietly left that same quarter in her mailbox, wrapped in a scrap of paper with no name on it. One came after another. An old man once pulled out drunk. A teacher carried across the river every day through a winter when her car broke down and she had no money to fix it. A retired miner, Silas, had driven back and forth to dialysis 3 times a week for 2 years, never taking a cent. There was a man who came down with his grown daughter beside him and could barely get the words out. He was a fisherman, and the year the mine laid off half the county, he had lost his boat to the bank and his wife to the sickness, and had stopped, he said, seeing any reason to go on. He had taken to standing at the end of the landing in the early dark, before Wren came to light the lamp, looking at the cold water. He never told anyone, but Silas had started leaving things for him. Not money, because the man had too much pride for money. A length of good line one morning, left where he would find it, as if by accident. A jar of his wife's preserves another, though Silas's wife made no preserves, and the man never figured out where they came from. A note once, in that square hand, that said only the channel runs different this year, Come look at it with me before you set your traps." And the man had gone, because a question about the river was a thing he could not refuse, and somewhere in the going, he had decided to stay alive after all. His daughter, standing beside him at the landing now, said she had 3 children. She said her father had never once told them this story, that she had only learned it that week from the ledger where her father's name appeared under a date and a single careful word: watching. One came after another, and Della began to see that the rescues had not all been from the water. Some had been from despair, from drink, from the slow drowning that happens on dry land, in kitchens and on porches, and at the ends of landings in the early dark. Silas had pulled people out of all of it, with line, and with preserves, and with questions about the channel, and he had written it all down in the same hand, because to him there was no difference. A person going under was a person going under. You rowed out, you did not ask why. There was a man named Wendell who came late one afternoon, standing a long time at the edge of the tree line before he found the courage to step out. He was past 50, thin, wearing a shirt buttoned to the collar, though the day was warm. He was the 16-year-old on the iron bridge. Years ago, he said, the one Silas had rowed out to and sat until morning. He told them that night he had already decided, already settled it all in his mind, and he could not understand how a ferryman had known to come out there at all. Only later did he guess. The lamp. Silas lit the lamp every night and sat watching the river, and he had seen a figure on the iron bridge standing longer than a man stands who is only passing through. Wendell said, Mr. Renner did not preach, did not counsel, did not ask why. He only rowed out, anchored the boat beneath the bridge, and said, "Colden, come down here and sit with me a while. I don't like sitting alone." And that kind lie, pretending that he was the one who needed the company, had kept Wendell there until the sun came up. Wendell had a small carpentry shop in Hollow Pine now. He made coffins for the people of the valley, and he said, not to impress anyone, but only because it was the truth, that he had built Silas Renner's coffin without charge, and had planed every board of cedar by hand, because it was the only thing he knew how to do to say thank you. Then there was a younger woman, named Lacey, leading 2 children. She said that the year she was 19, pregnant and abandoned, she had meant to leave Calder County one night, walking down to the landing to wait for the long-distance bus on the far side of the river. Silas carried her across, but before she stepped onto the bus, he asked her if she had anywhere to go. She said no. He did not stop her. He only said that if she changed her mind, the landing always had someone at it, and the lamp was always lit. She left. 3 days later she came back, with nowhere else to go, and Silas and Della. Della did not remember this. It was one of 100 things she had never noticed, arranged a place for her behind the laundromat, the very room where Wren would later live. Lacey stayed in Hollow Pine. Her 2 children went to school in town now. She said the older one was named Renee, the closest she had dared come to Renner. One came after another. Della sat and listened to them, person after person, and each story was a piece of a picture she had never been permitted to see whole. She began to understand why he was always home late. She began to understand the nights he sat at the landing longer than there was reason to, the times he went out without saying where, the loose coins that vanished from the jar on the kitchen shelf, which she had thought he frittered away. He did not fritter them away. He was wrapping quarters in paper and leaving them in a mother's mailbox so she would not have to feel she was in debt. She realized that the people standing at the back of the funeral had not been cold at all. They had been grieving in their own way. They were the living ledger. They were the names that had stepped off the page and into the world. And she understood one last thing, the most bitter and also the most tender. Silas had not hidden the ledgers from her because he did not trust her. He hid them because to him, saving a person and then telling the story of it was no longer saving. It became a debt. He did not want any of those people to owe him. He wanted them simply to be alive. Keep the lamp lit. No one crosses alone. He had not said those words to sound fine. He had said them as an oath. It might all have ended gently there, with a widow learning the true worth of her husband and a town at last saying its gratitude out loud. But life rarely lets kindness rest, because wherever there is a thing the world calls priceless, there comes someone to prove that everything has a price. He arrived on a December morning in an expensive black pickup so polished the mud of Calder County's roads seemed afraid to cling to it. His name was Brandon Kell. He was about 40, wearing a costly wool coat and leather shoes that had never known river mud. He stepped down to the landing, looked around the rotting property, with the quiet satisfaction of a man sees profit where others see ruin, and he held out a business card to Della. Meridian Crossings. He was the director of development. He spoke pleasantly, even warmly, in the way of men who have learned that warmth is a tool. He offered his condolences for her husband. He said he understood this was a hard time. Then he got to it. His company was planning to build a new toll bridge across the Laurel Fork, a modern bridge that would join the banks and bring, in his words, the development Calder County deserved. And the ideal site for the southern bridge footing, after many surveys, was Renner's Landing. He laid the number down like a card on a table. $45,000. Cash. For a piece of land the county had just appraised at zero. Della stood still. $45,000. She thought of the $164 in her account. She thought of the roof that needed reshingling, of the winters ahead, of an old age with nothing behind it. $45,000 was a number that could change the life of a widow at 47. And Brandon Kell saw that number working in her eyes, and he smiled because he thought he had won. He had done this many times. She could see that in the smoothness of him, the practiced way he gave her a moment to let the figure settle, the way his eyes flicked, just once, to the patch on her coat and the worn toes of her boots, taking the measure of her poverty and finding it convenient. He was not cruel. That was the thing she would think about later. He was not a villain twirling a mustache. He was something quieter and more common than that. He was a man to whom other people were line items, and he had simply never been shown a thing that would not fit in a spreadsheet, and so he had concluded that no such thing existed. He believed his own arithmetic the way some men believe scripture. And standing there in the cold with his card in her hand, Della understood that she was not looking at a wicked man. She was looking at a man who had been wrong about something his entire life and had been rewarded for it so consistently that the wrongness had hardened into the shape of success. But then he made a mistake. He looked around the landing again, looked at Wren standing silent by the boathouse, looked at the lamp on the post, and he said, in the gentle voice of a man who thinks he is stating the obvious, that of course the new bridge would be so much better for everyone. No one would have to take a ferry anymore. This backward little ferry crossing, he said, should have disappeared a long time ago. Something settled in Della when he said it. Not anger, exactly, a kind of clarity. Because she had said that very thing herself, in her own heart, 1,000 times, that the ferry was backward, that it should have died with the highway bridge, that her husband was a fool to keep it. She had spent 26 years agreeing with the man in the polished pickup. And hearing it now in his mouth, in that smooth and certain voice, she finally heard how it sounded. And she did not like the sound of her own old resentment coming back to her from a stranger who wanted to pour concrete over a girl who lit a lamp every night. She did not answer him. But the column in her mind that had been adding up his offer quietly closed itself. And then, because Della was silent too long, he added one last thing. He said that if she did not sell, that was fine too. His company had the right of eminent domain, condemnation, for public use. He said the words politely, almost regretfully, but they both understood what they were. It was a threat dressed in the clothes of the law. Sell to me at the price I offer, or I will take it at the price a court sets, and there will be nothing you can do. Della thanked him for coming. She said she needed time to think. Brandon Kell nodded generously, left the business card on the landing post beside the lamp, and drove away, leaving a thin trail of dust on the path that Silas's feet had worn into the earth over 40 years. That night Della did not go down to the ledgers. She sat at the kitchen table with the business card and the number 45,000 in her head, and she let herself weigh it honestly. She had been poor her whole life. She had patched other people's coats to earn every dollar. No one had any right to blame a woman like her for wanting to be safe. She thought of the roof that had sprung 2 more leaks over the winter. She thought of her eyes, going weak, of the not-distant day when she would no longer be able to sew. She thought of an old age with no children, no pension, nothing but a rotting landing the whole county had appraised at zero. $45,000 would buy peace of mind. It would buy nights, without lying awake counting. And there was a voice in her, the voice that had been angry at Silas for 26 years, whispering that this was her last chance to live for herself, after a whole life lived for his river. Sell it. Take the money. He gave enough away. It's your turn now. She let that voice talk. She did not silence it because it was not a wicked voice. It was only a tired one, the voice of a woman who had patched the world's coats for 40 years and had never once had a coat patched for her. She owed that voice a hearing. She sat with it at the kitchen table the way she had once sat with the household accounts, laying out the columns honestly. On the one side, a warm house, a safe winter, a kind of freedom she had never tasted. On the other side, a leaning dock, a lamp, and a girl who could not speak, who would have nowhere in this world to stand if the landing became a toll bridge. She found, doing the arithmetic, that the columns would not balance the way Brandon Kell wanted them to, because his number, large as it was, only counted the things money can hold. It did not have a column for Wren. It did not have a column for the next child in the eddy. It did not have a column for a promise, and a ledger that left out the most important thing was not, she knew better than anyone, a ledger you could trust. But then she thought of Wren, of what that toll bridge would mean for someone who could not speak, could not hear, had no car, had no money for a toll. She thought of all the names in the ledgers, of the people who would cross the river in the years to come, whose names no one yet knew, the children not yet born, who would fall into the eddy below the old bridge pier. A toll bridge does not save the people who have no money. A toll bridge carries across only those who can pay. But Silas's lamp carried everyone. She opened the newest ledger under the kitchen light and read again the last line he had written. A boy going home from school in the rain the day before he died. No payer named because the boy had no money. Only a crossing, a child home dry. And Della understood that if she sold this landing, she would not only be selling timber and nails. She would be selling that last line. She would be selling every line not yet written. She closed the ledger. She set Brandon Kell's business card down beside it, and in the yellow light of the kitchen, she saw the two things lying side by side like two worlds that could never understand each other. A glossy card with a company's name, a ledger full of people's names. She knew which world she belonged to. She remembered the notarized paper. Deed of Community Covenant. Rescue Landing, April 14, 2006. And she began to understand, dimly, that perhaps her husband had seen this day coming from a long way off. The next morning, she drove the old car into town, to the office of the old lawyer who had handed her the will. His name was Vernon Tate, past 70, a small office above the pharmacy, thick with the smell of old paper and a pipe long since given up. Della laid the notarized paper on his desk and asked what it meant. Vernon Tate put on his glasses, read it, and a very slow smile spread across his lined face. "I drew this up," he said, "in 2006. Silas came here one afternoon, sat in the very chair you're sitting in, and told me he wanted to do a thing no one could undo after he was gone." Vernon Tate leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the dusty window, remembering. He said Silas was not a man who talked about the future, but that day he talked more than usual. A company had come asking to buy riverfront land the year before, he said. Not Kell, another one whose name he had forgotten. They drew up beautiful maps, bridges, marinas. And Silas had understood something most poor people do not understand until it is too late. That land worthless today can become landmen hunger for tomorrow. And when that day comes, the weak are always the ones pushed off it. He was not worried for himself. He was nearing 50 by then, an old riverman already. He was worried about what would happen to the landing after he was no longer there to hold it. I asked him why he didn't just leave it to you. Vernon Tate said, looking straight at Della. Why not trust that his wife would keep it? And you know what he answered? He said, my wife is the strongest person I have ever known, but I have no right to put that weight on her alone. If it is only her standing between the landing and a company with lawyers and money, then one day they will wear her down. They will sue, they will threaten, they will wait. I do not want her to have to carry that. I want the law to carry it. I want this landing protected even when there is no one left strong enough to protect it. Della sat still, and something in her chest pulled tight. For 26 years, she had thought he did not care about her safety. It turned out he had spent years quietly building her a shield she had not even known she was being sheltered behind. He had not told her, because to tell her would have made it a debt, a thing she had to be grateful for. He had only done it, quietly signed it, had it notarized, recorded it at the courthouse, then come home and eaten the supper she made and said not a word. He had not only kept the lamp lit for the people on the river, he had kept it lit for her too for 19 years, without her ever knowing. I'm about to tell you what Silas did. The move he quietly prepared 19 years before. The move that would collapse Brandon Kell's whole plan in a single sentence. But before I open that paper, let me ask you one thing. If this story is reaching you, if you want to see how kindness can defend itself, please hit subscribe right now and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, what city, what country. It helps stories like this keep being told. Now, let's go back to Della, sitting in that old lawyer's smoke-stained office. Vernon Tate explained it slowly, because he knew these things were not easy for a person who had never studied law. In 2006, Silas Renner had done a very unusual thing with his land. He had not sold it. He had not given it away. He had placed it under what is called a permanent conservation easement, held by a state land trust, and at the same time he had formally registered Renner's Landing as a recognized river rescue station. Under the terms of that covenant, recorded in the county land registry, notarized, irrevocable, the land was bound forever to a single purpose, to serve as public access and rescue on the Laurel Fork. No private structure could be built on it. No toll structure could be raised on it. It could not be condemned and converted to commercial use. Forever. Della asked what that meant for the toll bridge. Vernon Tate took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt tail. It means, he said, that your Mr. Kell can have all the money and all the lawyers in the world, and he still cannot set a toll bridge footing on Renner's Landing. Not today, not next year, not ever. Silas locked that door 19 years ago. The power of eminent domain does not beat a conservation easement that has already been legally dedicated to a higher public purpose. That land already belongs to the community. It already belongs to the river and to everyone who will ever have to cross it. No one can buy a thing that has already been given away. He looked at Della across the desk. Silas knew the bridge would come, he said. Maybe not Kell, maybe not this year. But he knew that one day someone would come with a number and a piece of legal paper and try to take the landing. So he made sure that when that day came, that person would lose. He didn't do it for himself. He did it for the ones who came after. Brandon Kell came back after Christmas, bringing a thick file and 2 lawyers in suits that did not suit the river mud. He had been confident. He thought a poor widow would be easy to bend. He spread the condemnation papers across the wooden table in the boathouse, began explaining the legal process in a condescending voice, and then Della Renner did a thing he did not expect. She did not argue. She did not beg. She only laid a single sheet of paper on top of his stack of files. The notarized copy of the conservation easement, recorded in 2006. One of the 2 lawyers picked it up. He read it. He read it again. Then he leaned over and whispered something in Brandon Kell's ear, and Della saw the moment the confidence left his face like water draining out of sand. He tried. Of course he tried. He talked about appeals, about reconsideration, about loopholes. But his own lawyer, man paid to know when a fight is already lost, shook his head very slightly. The easement was permanent. It had been legally recorded 19 years before. It was defended by a state land trust. There was no loophole. This land could never be a toll bridge. Brandon Kell stood up. For the first time since he had arrived, he was no longer warm. He looked around the rotting boathouse, looked at the seamstress in her patched coat, looked at the silent girl beside the lamp, and Della watched him try one last time to appraise all of it, to find the number. He tried a few more angles, because men like him do not give up easily. He said perhaps there was a way to amend the easement. Perhaps a generous contribution to the land trust would make them reconsider. Vernon Tate, who had come down with Della that day, only took off his glasses to wipe them and said a single thing that made the whole room go quiet. "You don't understand," he said, his voice old and calm. "This easement is not a locked door you can find the key to. It is a door that was built into the wall. There is no key. The man who made it deliberately made it impossible to open. And he did that because he had met men like you before, and he knew you would always come back." He looked around one last time, and Della saw something in his eyes she almost pitied. It was not anger. It was bewilderment. He truly did not understand. He had come here believing that everything has a price, that enough money can buy anything, even a river, even an oath. His whole world was built on that belief, and now he was standing in a rotting boathouse in a town with no name, facing the proof that there are things money cannot buy, and he had no frame to hold that truth in. He lost not because he lacked money. He lost because he had appraised wrong the thing Silas Renner left behind. He thought it was a piece of land. It was a promise. Before he left, he paused at the door and asked Della a question, almost sincerely. He asked why. Why a poor woman like her would refuse $45,000 to keep a pile of rotting wood. Della looked at him a long moment. Then she said, not to defeat him, but only so he might hear the truth once in his life, that her husband had spent 40 years making sure no one had to cross this river alone, and she would not be the one to sell what he had paid for with his whole life. "You appraised it at 0, she said. "My husband appraised it at everything he had. One of you measured wrong." He did not answer. He drove away and never came back. The toll bridge, Della later heard, was built at another bend several miles to the south, where no poor person needed to cross, where no lamp needed to be lit. Let it stand there. Renner's Landing remained. Spring came late to Calder County that year, the way it always comes late to the mountains, hesitant, wet, and then suddenly bursting in a single green week. Della and Wren had finished mending the landing before the river rose. They replaced the rotted boards, repainted the steel boat, re-roofed the boathouse. Della used her seamstress's hands to sew the torn life rings back together, every stitch sound, and she taught Wren to sew them right, so that when she herself was gone, someone would still know how to keep the rings afloat. People from town came down to help, no one asking anyone, bringing wood, nails, paint, and meals they left on the landing post without a word. The landing an appraiser had recorded as worth zero was being rebuilt in a currency he had no spreadsheet to measure. Della did not sell Renner's Landing. Nor did she hand it back to the county. She kept it. And every morning she walked down the gently sloping path, the gravel crunching under her boots in the very rhythm Silas's feet had worn into the earth, and she lowered the steel boat into the water. She was not yet a good ferryman, but she learned. Wren taught her the eddies, the shallows, how to read the current that Silas had taught her with his hands years before. The two women took turns carrying people across, the children going to school, the mothers with no car, the old men going to their appointments. A quarter when they had it, nothing when they did not. Della never wrote down who had not paid. She understood at last why Silas never wrote it down. And every night, one of them climbed the tall post and lit the oil lamp. One evening in May, after the water had dropped and the river had gone gentle again, Della carried the ledgers out of the small shed. She dusted them off, set them back in order, and laid the newest one on the table under the storm lantern. That one still had many blank pages. Silas's last entry stopped at a line dated in November, the day before he died, a crossing carrying a boy home from school in the rain. After that, the blank. Della picked up the pen. She sat a long time before the empty page, a seamstress more at home with stitches than with words, and she thought of everything she had misunderstood, of the 26 years she had counted wrong, of the man she had only truly met after he was gone. She thought of what she would say to him if he were still sitting here, beside the storm lantern, with those river eyes. She would not apologize because he would not want an apology. To him it would only become a debt. She would only say that she understood now, that she had read every name, that she would keep the lamp, and she thought he would only nod, the way he always nodded, and turn back to the water, because to Silas Renner being understood had never been the point. The point was that the lamp stayed lit. Then she wrote. She did not write a eulogy. She did not write a confession. She only did the thing he had done for more than 40 years. She kept the record going. Della Renner, keeper of the landing, following Silas Renner, keep the lamp lit. She set down the pen. Outside, through the boathouse door, she saw Wren climbing the post and the lamp flared. A small yellow ring cast out onto the black water, enough that anyone down there, in the dark, not knowing where the shore was, would have a point to swim toward. Wren climbed down, stood beside her, and the two women watched the lamp burn over the river that a dead man had given his whole life so that no one would ever have to cross it alone. In the years that followed, the people of Hollow Pine grew used to the sight of two women at Renner's Landing, one who could not speak and one who had finally learned to listen. Young people grew up, went away, and some of them came back, and a few of them, the ones who had been pulled from the water as children, their children came asking to learn how to row, how to light the lamp, how to read the current. Della sat them down at the wooden table in the shed and made them read the ledgers, all of them. She made them read the names, one by one, until they understood that this landing was not timber and nails and a steel boat. It was 40 years of people who had not drowned. It was a promise someone had to keep going. Wendell the carpenter came down and rebuilt the boathouse floor in cedar, the planing so smooth it shone like still water, and took no money. Dale Pruitt brought his son Silas down every summer to learn to swim at the safe bend, and the boy grew into a teenager, and then a strong young man who, one flood night years later, would pull two people out of the water himself and write their names in the ledger in his own clumsy hand. Lacey sent her daughter Renee down to learn to sew with Wren and Della, and 3 women of 3 generations sat mending life rings under the storm lantern through the autumn afternoons, the needle going up and down in silence. The landing an appraiser had recorded as worth 0 became a place the whole town came to, not to buy or sell anything, but only to belong to something larger than themselves. Wren never left. She became the chief keeper of the landing as Della grew old, and she taught back everything she had been taught, with her hands, not with words, exactly the way Silas had taught her. And every night, never missing one, she climbed the tall post and lit the lamp. People in town said that when you drove through the valley at night and looked down at the river, you could still see it, a small yellow point burning on the black water, and if you did not know the story, you would think it was only a lamp. But the ones who knew understood what it was. It was a promise kept. It was the way a dead man still spoke to the river, telling it that no one had to cross alone. There were hard years, too, because the kind of work the landing asked for does not get easier with telling. There was a spring the river came up higher than anyone living had seen it. And the water took the lower dock and 3 of the life rings, and very nearly took Wren, who would not come in until she was sure no one was out in it. There was a winter a boy did go under at the old eddy, and the word lost was written in the ledger again, in Della's hand this time, and she learned what Silas had carried all those years, that you keep the lamp lit, not because it saves everyone, but because the night the lamp is dark is the night you cannot forgive. She wrote that boy's name down with the same care he would have. She went to the funeral. She did not let the river have him twice. But there were more of the other kind. There was the flood night that Dale Pruitt's son Silas, grown strong now, swam out twice into water. No sensible man would enter, and brought back a mother and her child and wrote their 2 names in the Abishter afterward, his hand shaking too hard to keep the line straight, and Della told him the crooked line was the truest one in the book. There was the year Renee, Lacey's daughter, sewed a set of life rings so fine and so sound that Della kept one hanging on the boathouse wall the way another woman might frame a diploma. The landing an appraiser had recorded, as worth 0 became a place the whole town came to, not to buy or sell anything, but only to belong to something larger than themselves. People left things on the post the way they had left quarters on the grave, a jar of preserves, a coil of good line, a child's drawing of a boat and a lamp. No one organized it. It simply happened, the way water finds the low place, the way kindness, once it is shown where the channel runs, keeps running there. Della Renner lived many more years beside that river. When she was old and her hands could no longer row, she sat at the edge of the landing in the afternoons and watched Wren, and after Wren others, carry people across and light the lamp each night. The account that had once held only $164 never grew rich. Della was never rich, but she had come to understand, at the end of her life, a thing the man counting money in the polished black pickup would never understand. A legacy is not what we own. A piece of land can be appraised at 0. A ferry landing can rot. A bank account can drain down to a few loose coins. But there are things no appraiser can measure, no power of condemnation can take, no number can buy. A name written down so it will not be forgotten. A hand reached out in the dark. A lamp lit every night for a stranger you will never meet. Silas Renner left his wife a river and a set of ledgers full of people's names. It took his death for her to finally read them. But once she read them, she never stopped. And that in the end is all that kindness asks of us. Not wealth, not thanks. Only that we keep the door of rescue from ever being locked, that we keep a place on the page for the next name, and that we keep the lamp burning. Keep the lamp lit, no one crosses alone.